see how that is. Cool, cool. That's there, that's there. I think we're good to go. Let me see if I can get the chat visible. I think I need to redo that. Let me see what I can do. There's always a little something to make work with all this stuff. Let me crank up the volume a little bit too. Cool, I think that's going. And then we can transition over the chat so you all can see the chat as it's there. Oh, I should put this back in the fridge. Oopsie. Be right back. So starting a little late tonight. Apologies. I had a very weird week at work. A very responsible week at work. You know, one of those weeks where there was not just a lot going on, but a lot that I had to keep track of and make sure was working, and just a lot of people asking me for things and asking me about things. So ended up being pretty tiring for that reason and in that way. But we're here, and we can talk about anime and manga and such. Let me pull up the news, see what's been going on, because I've not been paying that much attention to the anime news recently. I actually was not expecting to be here tonight. Originally, I was going to be up on, actually out in Boston for PAX East. No, that is cool. The ad is locking up the page, so I can't actually do anything with it. That's cute. So just one moment while I try to get the news to actually display. But yeah, I was going to be at PAX East today, but unfortunately had, like I said, the stuff going on at work actually that kind of meant that I really should not be out of town today. So all things considered, I'm glad I stayed. Miss my friends, miss the folks that are going to meet up at PAX, but still, that is just the way of things sometimes. See if I can scroll down here. Anything remarkable? Excuse me. Second season for Promised Neverland announced. No big surprise there. Another Star Blazers Yamato thing. Promised Neverland coming to Toonami. Let's see. Some video game announcements. Crunchyroll's price increased. Big shock there. Hey, Game Escape. Yeah, PAX is a video game convention. Primarily video game convention. But they have a very strong tabletop area and section. They started a few years ago. I mean, they've had tabletop for a while, but I think on the first or second PAX East, just their tabletop area exploded. It was just massively well attended, just absolutely packed with people. And so they've expanded it every year. And so if you want tabletop gaming, you can get it there at PAX, which is pretty cool. Looks like I'm going to have to fiddle with the camera again, because that focus does not want to stick. There we go. We're just going to do manual focus today. Let's see. Anime Japan 2019. That's like a conference, isn't it? So, yeah, that was a... that is it's a good time, but I've been to PAX East a fair number of times, and it's an amazing time, but primarily if you're into video games. And I'm I'm just not deep enough into video games for that to be something where I really enjoy spending. Oh, I'm bleeding. Whoa, excuse me. I was just scratching my leg and I realized I must have like dug into something, and I've got some. 1 second, jeez. Like normally this would not be a big deal, but apparently must be something ooh, I got like red all over my leg. Let me bandage that up. Yeah, normally I just ignore it and move on and just let it clot, but this is kind of going. I don't want to sit here bleeding all night. There we go. This is the kind of stuff you only get live. All right. You all may notice a slight change to the background. Hey, Mike Hunter. Yeah, it's one of those days. Like, oh, I'm bleeding. I love it. Yeah, I was gonna be at PAX. That didn't work out, literally because of work. And I can get some other stuff done over the weekend, as it turns out. But so some friends of mine do a panel called Tabletop System Wars, where folks come with their crazy idea for a tabletop game campaign, and we all argue about which system they should use for that. It's a lot of fun. But that's mainly what I would have been there for. So again, if you're into video games, PAX East is amazing. But you have to kind of be really, really deep into that. In other words, you need to be willing to play a new video game like every half hour for all weekend, and that's just kind of not my style. Nothing against it, just not my approach to stuff. Yeah, I'm assuming the price increase on Crunchyroll is just one of those things. Just a standard kind of price increase, because that's kind of how it has to be. Things get more expensive over time. Persona 5 Stars and Hours anime special on Crunchyroll, cool. Second season for Cells at Work, cool. That manga has been going on for a while. All right, so let's. New episode of Goblin Slayer coming. All right, so let's see here. So Funimation is streaming Gundam Build Divers to Funimation now, which is interesting, just because Funimation has typically not been a Gundam licensor in past that I can recall. So why are they doing Gundam Build Divers? It's interesting. Wonder what's going on. Crunchyroll and Gundam Info had it. Maybe Funimation just picked it up after Crunchyroll stopped doing it. Yeah, Mike, that's one of the things, is that one of the problems with a convention is that you really want to go there for the stuff that it's centralized on. Katsucon's a great example. Katsucon is primarily a cosplay convention. So if you're there to look at cosplay, if you're a cosplayer, obviously, but also if you like wandering the halls and looking at cosplay and taking photographs, it's heaven. But that means it's a little lighter on things like panels or guests or things like that. Obviously, there are guests, there are things, but that is kind of the thing that really attracts people, and the things that if you want to be there for a weekend, you need to be able to do that. And so that's that thing. Tabletop gaming conventions are great if you're into tabletop, because it is hard to get exposure to a lot of those various systems beyond like D&D and such. So you can go to one of those conventions and just get a very different experience. It can be in D&D, which is very different players and a very different experience, or a very different system, different world. So let's see here. So a new sequel to 2199 has been announced. The Space Battleship Yamato Star Blazers thing. No format announced. It would be a concert this fall. So that's interesting. So this is 2202, Warriors of Love. And I'm assuming this goes beyond the original storyline. I don't know. So I thought they kind of handled that. I thought they were kind of getting to the end of that story. Only on to one convention, a retro gaming convention near Philadelphia, and it was just too crowded for my taste. Yeah, it's another problem with some conventions. One of the reasons I like going to smaller conventions because they're not crowded. PAX East is just wall-to-wall people, and that is another reason why I'm kind of hesitant to do it a lot of times, just because if you're an introvert, it's kind of not that not as much fun as like a smaller con or a other con would be. Otacon's an example of a large con, but it's in a very large space, so you don't feel like you're like this all the time. There's certainly crowded areas, but there's a lot of flow and movement and again just space for all the people. So Crunchyroll went from $7 to $8 basically for the 1 month premium membership plan, and the 12 month premium plan going from 60 to 80. Odd. Okay. Definitely differences there on the math. That'll take place August 1st. That's U.S. prices, obviously, and looks like relatively similar prices for Britain and Australia. Also, price increase in the Nordics. This is the first major price increase in the service's history. Everything else is here. So Crunchyroll said, due to rising costs of content and infrastructure, now's the time to introduce new subscription pricing. So yeah, that sounds like it's just running all those servers, licensing all that anime. At some point, the costs increase, and so it's like this is how it goes. So it's instead of $7 a month, it's $8 a month. Rounded off. And it was. Let me see. I'm terrible with math. So. Yeah. So instead of $60 a year, it's now $80 a year. So what was $5 a month is now $6.66 a month. So the monthly cost of the beast for Crunchyroll now, but still cheaper than $8 a month. But yeah, $12 a month increase for monthly, and $20 a month increase yearly. Huh. I wonder if I mean, I've heard that very few people actually go for the yearly. So it could be one of those things where, like, if you want to go yearly, we might as well charge you a little bit more because there are very few of those. And keeping multiple different subscriptions plans is more expensive. So it kind of offsets the cost, maybe? I don't know. But that is odd to kind of increase things. Yeah, PAXPOX. PAXPOX is a big thing. Any large convention, you risk getting ill. And honestly, frankly, as a lead instructor, it is really rough for me to miss work, because then it's like somebody else has to teach this. Like, we have to find somebody else to do the instructions, and it kind of sucks for people. Yeah, and there may also be, in fairness, sometimes like the original price wasn't quite working very well, so it could be that yearly price was a little low given everything else. So this is kind of a correction of adjustment. I don't know. It can be stressful, especially because as lead instructor, there's another lead instructor as well. But so we're kind of both managing the project. We're both scheduling speakers, and we're both making sure that the content is scheduled out and we have all our lessons planned, and we have all the material like written up, and we know who's teaching when and all that stuff. So it's just a lot to manage, like the teaching aspect. I mean, that's also a part of it. You know, getting up in front of people and teaching them programming is difficult. But anyway, yeah, so it can be stressful. So kind of trying to minimize stress is an important thing. I am not. I might go to Korea at some point. I am not. I don't have any definitive plans at the moment, but I do want to talk about Korea today. I actually have a book on this, which I wanted to pull out. See, I just rearranged stuff. You may notice in the background some changes. There used to be books going all the way down here, and now I've moved some bookcases out and moved one of the 3D printing things against the wall, so I have a little bit more space in here for some of my projects, which is kind of nice. I'm actually kind of quite happy with how that turned out. But I had a book on Korea. Is that it? Pop Korea. There we go. Pop Korea, measured access. Yeah, transgender. Okay, cool. So if you're interested, this is actually a really useful book about Korean culture. It came out a few years ago. What does this say? 2008, so it's a decade old. But it's basically about the rise of Korean culture. Apologies, the color makes some weird like moire patterns. But definitely, definitely useful as kind of a guide to the rise of Korean culture. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, the wall scroll fits quite well. Actually, now that I have, yeah, I might end up getting another wall scroll for right there, rather. I can now fit something there. I've not seen Love is War. No. Yeah, exactly, Mark. It's like, huh? So the yearly thing costs more. Strange. So yeah, Korea has definitely, South Korea, has definitely evolved dramatically. We talked about Korea before, but I think it's worth delving into the impact, not just the impact of Korea, but about Korea specifically, and how Korea has been a really a force on its own. I mean, we've talked about Korea and its impact on anime specifically, but the fact that Korea has Korea has become an exporter of anime, of K-pop, of movies. There's a Korean live action Jinro, which I think I've mentioned about this before. So Jinro the Wolf Brigade, remarkable classic anime film. There is a Korean adaptation of that, and like it's about Korea. And there's certainly a lot of really interesting Korean films. Obviously, Old Boy being one of the seminal ones back in the day. And let's see here. But yeah, I think there's a lot of Korea has definitely just over the past few decades grown to become this big cultural powerhouse. Certainly not on the scale of Japan, just in terms of the number of productions and so forth. But if you're looking for interesting, animation, interesting movies, TV shows, K-dramas are definitely big. Go on Crunchyroll. There's plenty of K-dramas out there, and so it feels like they're now to that point where they can compete. You've got Korean comedies, Korean late night talk shows and things that are really very much like what you see in Japan and other parts of the world. And I say this not to suggest that imagine that South Korea, because South Korea was not producing a lot of sort of exported culture until relatively few decades ago. I mean, really, it wasn't until I guess when did Old Boy come out? 2005. Originally in Korea, it looks like. Yeah. So it seems to me yeah, we've had maybe 15 years of the rise of Korean culture, on that kind of global stage. And obviously, there's been Korean productions made, Korean TV shows, and so forth. But now you're even seeing, Korean live action TV series on Netflix being licensed on Netflix. So it's there. It's reached that global audience, and not just because like someone's pushing it, not just because Netflix decided to license something. Oh yeah, the Zombie Train movie. I forget the name of that. That was a big deal a little while ago. Snowpiercer, I think. Is that the one? Or is that a? Yeah, yeah, that's it. And I think Snowpiercer may be a Western film, but with Korean the Korean director and Korean and such. Oh, Train to Busan. No, Train to Busan. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, that's the one. Train to Busan. Snowpiercer is Korean director, Korean actor, I believe, but Hollywood production. So yeah, that's a big deal. And that was, when was that? Rotten Tomatoes is not very good about. Yeah, so that was a couple years ago. Yeah, that really feels like we have that material out there. And as we talked about before, Korea has long been a silent partner in Japanese anime, and they've also been churning out a lot of Western animation. So a lot of the Western cartoon shows that we've grown up with, were actually animated in Korea. Even like the Steven Spielberg, the Warner Brothers stuff, the Disney stuff, some of that was actually animated over in Korea. So yeah, there's I think that's kind of there. So what's interesting about that is a couple of things. One is that Japan has been really ramping up this idea of anime as cultural export, of its pop culture as this valuable commodity that it can make money on, especially as the population ages, especially as the birth rate dwindles. This idea that, well, our economy can keep on, moving forward with these things that honestly don't require, decades worth of skilled labor. Something that you can do when you're in your 20s or your 30s, and is thus a more flexible kind of element of the economy. But now you have Korea that is starting to get close on that. And a couple years ago, Korea got two pretty major animated films that just did extremely well. And so now there's that opportunity for their animation industry to start really moving forward. Now, unfortunately, the animation quality is very different. Excuse me. The action animation just isn't on the same level. It's different in style, and also just that level of sakuga, that extremely fluid action animation all done by one animation, is really exciting. And is Japan is very much specialized in, and they really have not handed that over to Korean animators. Korean animators weren't the ones working on those shots, so they don't have the experience in that. They don't know how to do those things, or more accurately, they haven't had the opportunity to draw those Naruto fight scenes or Attack on Titan fight scenes. Yeah, exactly, Mike. He-Man and G.I. Joe and Transformers, those shows in the 80s, 90s, they were all animated in Korea or Japan, because they were just outsourced to there. A lot of them were. A few were not. Care Bears, for example, was a Canadian production. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this stuff out there. He-Man was also outsourced, I believe. So yeah, it's rough. Actually, no, He-Man might not have been. I think He-Man might have gone to Filmation. I'll have to look that up. But definitely a major thing. So yeah, I mean, I think this throws a wrench into the works of Japan's plans to leverage anime as a major cultural export, especially if Korea can start to compete on that Naruto, One Piece kind of a level. But that's a really big open question, because when you look at them, when you look at the major animated films coming out of Korea of the past 5 years or so, they've been family films, they've been intense dramas. There was a zombie film actually a couple of years ago I haven't got a chance to watch yet. And so it's like there's some really interesting stuff there, but it's not that global appeal stuff, right? It's more indie in that way, or it's more, broad family appeal. Exactly, Mike. It's like, and that's the problem, is that it's going to take a long time, I think, for Korea to get up to the level of Japan in terms of that quality of action animation. But who knows? There's a lot that can happen, especially if Korea starts investing in their animators, and they start really focusing on this. It's actually interesting comparing this to China, because China has been doing a lot of action animation focused things, and they've definitely got that kind of art style down. But by focusing on more shonen style stories, I think their animators can get up to speed more quickly with that stuff that has that broader appeal. Now, then there's the other side of that, which is maybe you don't need to follow the exact same pattern that Japan did. What if Korea forges its own path? What if you don't, in other words, what if they find global success in things that are not One Piece, Dragon Ball Z, or Dragon Ball Super now, Attack on Titan? What is the global appeal there? Maybe they go for the more Nicktoons, family style shows, and those succeed. It it certainly could work. Right, and that's the thing, Game Escape, is I think Korea is now starting to be that remarkable foreign culture that Japan doesn't have quite as much of. I think we're more familiar with Japan now. I think Japan has become certainly not, normal and everyday, but more of a known factor. Whereas Korea still feels very foreign, and it still feels like it is something you can kind of dive into and learn a lot about. Partly because Korea has followed this very specific path historically, right? Japan's history is fascinating, but Korea definitely has its own interesting twists and turns in its evolution and thus its culture. But it's also just similar enough to Japan, I think, that those folks who grew up, those young adults or folks in their 20s and 30s who got into anime as teenagers, and who kind of pass it on to their preteen and tween and young teen kids, they may have heard about Japan as this amazing country, and Korea is close enough to that to still have that foreignness, to still have that oddity. But K-pop's not so different from J-pop that you can't comprehend it. That you can kind of apply your one's exposure to J-pop to K-pop. You can apply your exposure to anime to Korean animation, K-anime. Well, maybe we'll call it that. I don't know. Right, Mike, and that's one of the other interesting questions, is that the Japanese anime industry has been pumping out a lot of material, and we have a lot of new shows every season, and that usually suggests a bubble coming up. We've certainly seen that more than once in the past. So there's just so much shows coming out, and then that led to a contraction of the industry, and that could really be an opening for Korea to come in. So that's a good question, Game Escape. Is Korea just mimicking Japan? Now, I don't. So here's the thing. I think there is some imitation there to an extent, but I think that's inevitable in the sense that everyone imitates everyone else all the time. You know, a lot of popular American shows were actually originally British shows. They're just, you know, American remakes or vice versa, right? So there's a lot of that where things kind of, you know, every culture influences other cultures and borrows from other cultures or just steals from other cultures. So I think that's to some extent natural in this. But it's certainly when you look at K-pop, K-pop is very similar to J-pop, at least on the surface level, right? At least on that basic, you know, pattern of how the music is structured and how the industry is structured. No diminishing, it's just it's following that pattern. Similarly with I think Korean animation, where it was, you know, I think Korean anime, it was in many ways kind of mimicking a lot of that that Japanese style and kind of Japanese structure. But I think things like Leafy, Head into the Wild, this big Korean family film from a while ago, kind of pointed that, oh, okay, we don't have to do things in the same pattern. That's kind of the interesting thing, is that Leafy and I'm forgetting the name of the other one, which is this King of Pigs, which were these two big or two successful animated films in Korea a couple of years ago. They were so different, both from like American animated films and from Japanese animated films, that they suggest that Korea could very much forge its own path and find its own pattern. Let's see here. Yeah, you're certainly right, Game Escape. It's definitely the tech and auto industries are very much patterned on the Japanese models. Although, granted, American industry has patterned itself off of a lot of Japanese models now. But yeah, exactly. But you know, to your point, Game Escape, you know, it is certainly true that from what I can tell, the Korean companies, you know, set themselves up at the beginning. You know, all of their structures were set up in imitation of Japanese models. You know, whereas American companies adopted various elements of those, right, but didn't, you know, completely reinvent themselves in the Japanese mold. But then again, this is where it's kind of different because Korea's industry really didn't, or really started becoming global, really started becoming at this large scale in the 80s and, you know, the 90s, when those models were available, right? You know, they didn't have massive manufacturing industry in the 20s and 30s. Those things really, you know, happened just in the past couple of decades. I mean, 80s and 90s maybe a little too recent, but you know what I mean, where those giant corporations, I forget the name of it, they're the Korean, the big Korean companies, there's a name for them, the Daebols, I think. You can probably find it in here. Do they have I thought I had a little dictionary in here somewhere. But let's see the index. It's not in the index, so I probably got that wrong. But there's some term, chaebol, thank you. These, you know, massive corporations. They were really, I mean, they existed for a long time, but they spun up into massive corporations right when all of these Japanese corporations were really big. So that pattern was kind of right there. Yeah, well, and you know, the problem American manufacturing had, so I've had some exposure to this. What's funny is that the Japanese way came in to the American auto industry right when it was at its greatest crisis, when those methods helped but could not have been enough to you know, to save the American auto industry. So they were, you know, they improved things here and there, but they really didn't, you know, they really didn't help a lot. But if you look into other parts of manufacturing, other parts of industry, those things have been extremely successful. So the Toyota Way and such things have been instrumental. Amazon famously has implemented quite a bit of that Japanese stuff. And that is how they have been so successful, is by implementing Toyota style systems. So unfortunately, it got kind of a bad rap because of where the automotive industry was in the U.S. But yeah, and I think the thing is, again, I think Korea could benefit from that the most because they could set everything up from scratch with those systems. Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Is that there has to be complete buy-in all the way down the line. Like a lot of systems, you can't just mandate something and have it work. There's actually a really fun side story about that. A friend was telling me today. There was this company that was making. They were manufacturing. They were selling things that came in boxes, and they had to fill the boxes with these objects. I forget what they were, but basically there was a flaw in their manufacturing process where about every 100th box would not get filled and would just be empty, and would go down the line empty. And it was this really big issue because they would end up getting into the actual shipping lane, and the people would start shipping it out. So they brought in a company to figure out what was going on and to try to solve this, and they couldn't find the flaw. So they implemented a system that would check all the boxes, and at this one point in the line would actually had a scale on the line, and if it was under a certain weight, would set off a siren, stop the line, which would cause somebody to come over, pull the box out, start the line up again. And then it would also count how many times that happened, so they would kind of get an idea what was going on. And so they implemented it. In the first month, they had a certain number of incidents. Second month, they had 0 incidents. So they went down to the floor and found that the worker whose job it was to restart the line had gotten really annoyed with that. So he set up a box fan right next to the assembly line that blew against the assembly line, such that as the packages were going by, if any of them were empty, it would get blown off the line and just fall on the floor, and the rest of them would go through. And he'd just come by every so often and pick up, the 2 or 3 boxes that were on the ground and, put them back in the line. Everyone realized, we just spent, months building this whole system and setting everything up to make all this work, when really just a box fan, would solve the entire thing. But yeah. Let's see here. Well, that's the thing, Mike, is part of the problem there is, again, cultural. In a culture like Japan, that is built on consensus, that is built on everyone, you do not move forward unless everyone agrees on the right thing to do. Those processes work extremely well. And so if you have a company, an organization where folks, all come together and where everyone can find ways of discussing things and agreeing things and kind of understanding how things went, that can work very well. It totally works in certain cultures, but it does not work everywhere else. And it does not work in every organization. I was actually in an organization that moved towards lean manufacturing, and it worked quite well while I was there, because the organization was very open and people could, talk back and forth. And if somebody didn't want to do something, they would talk about it and they would discuss it. They wouldn't just, I'm not going to do that, So, but if it was a problem, they would say, well, this is a problem because of A, B, C, D, and so you could go back and kind of, management could talk about that, and so it can work. But there has to be that dialogue amongst everyone to say, well, what's, this seems like a really much more efficient way of doing stuff. How can we implement that in a way that makes sense for us? Anyway, so Korea had, could implement a lot of that stuff, and I think it's one of the reasons why Korea has blossomed, because they could kind of pick and choose the best of all of these systems. They could say, okay, here's what works for Korea, or here's what works for Japan, and it works well for us, partly because, adjacent countries that are certainly more similar to each other than Holland would be, right? But that's the thing, is that you get lots of stuff. You get lots of options, and then they could see things that maybe the Americans had done that was useful, or Britain or whatever. And so because you have that, you can produce a lot, and they also have the advantage with the chaebols that they can fund a lot of production. In fact, Populous Korea talks a lot about how those companies would just set up a movie studio and just say, okay, we're just going to start making movies. And a bunch of them are going to fail, but we know some of them are going to be successful. And the key here is not to have, not that we need to have one successful movie every month. It is that 10 years from now, we will have a movie industry that we basically own. Or we own a large piece of it. And that's going to be way more valuable than the exact box office gross of any given movie today. So that's a really big deal. Hey DS Lite, Plan Test being fun, cool. Yeah, so Technolize is a weird show, and I mean that in the best possible sense and in the most intentional sense. Technolize is clearly meant to be weird, clearly meant to be different, and that first episode is almost like a pilot episode in that it just kind of throws a lot of stuff at you that will be explained later or will be explored later. Some of it's never really explained. But it is just, here's a bunch of stuff to kind of overwhelm you, and then it evolves over time. And man, the ending of Technolize. That is one of those things where I paused at the very end and just thought about that for about an hour, actually. I just sat there and thought about Technolize. Yeah, and funny what happens when you get the staff of Lane to make another anime series. It kind of looks like Lane. So yeah. So I think Korea has a lot of potential, particularly in the animated space, because I think Korea is now at a place where they're producing K-dramas that are reasonably successful for exports. Some people always want like their favorite thing to become massively worldwide successful on the level of like a James Cameron's Avatar or Twilight. It's like nothing ever does that. It's very rare for something that niche to ever like break into the mainstream. But I think K-dramas are doing very well. K-pop is certainly growing and growing and growing really well. See you, Mike. Thanks for stopping by. So yeah, that's those seem to be fine. It's that anime, man. It's how the anime is going to be able to find its niche and find its audience. Partly, I think too, it's got to find its market, because there's just not that many people looking for Korean animated film, and there's a lot of in Korean animation in general, and there's very little in the way of Korean like animated TV series. There are a handful out there, but that industry just has not spun up yet, which makes it really hard, because when you think about these really successful subcultures, folks who watch a lot of a foreign culture cinema or whatever, it's because there's a lot of it, right? If you think of like Hong Kong cinema, which got really big back in the 70s and 80s, well, the Shaw brothers were churning out just dozens of Hong Kong action films and martial arts films every year over in Hong Kong. That's the thing, that's how to do it. That's an important thing. So DS Lite, that is a phrase that I think you could apply to kind of any fandom. Is K-pop fandom particularly different? Because I see that in, I see that in fans of hip-hop and fans of any number of things. But, yeah, I think there are a lot of options, or there are not a lot of options for Korean anime fans, because there's just not a lot of Korean anime that has been produced. You have to go. You can go back to the stuff from the 70s and 80s. It was very derivative. But that's really there more for cheese factor. I don't think anyone's like a an unapologetic fan of the giant robot ripoff movies of the Korean of the 1980s in Korea. So, yeah, it's gonna be hard for that to break through, and I wonder really why there isn't a big Korean animated TV segment. I know there's a fair amount of Korean animation for kids, as with anywhere in the world, pretty much. But we're just not getting those action things. We're not getting those things for everyone that you get in a lot of other. You get in Japan again, and even over here in America, we have a lot of cartoons that do well for kind of a broader audience than just kids. I don't know. It's weird. Yeah, I mean, we have a good decade's worth of, well, actually, like a decade and a half now of interesting Korean animated films. You know, Oseam, Wonderful Days, Yobi the Five-Tailed Fox. There's some really neat stuff out there, but it's been sporadic. My Beautiful Girl Marie. I'm trying to think of the others. Oh, Dinosaur and I, which I watched fairly recently. Yeah, it's out there, but yeah, there's not that much. So I think that's going to be a limiting factor, unless this. So here's the other interesting question: will Korea take a similar approach to anime that the Japanese government has taken, and try to promote that? You know, put money into the industry, fund promotional works, you know, kind of try to push that industry forward. Because if they do, again, they're in a really good place to grow that industry very fast. Because the Japanese industry being the size it is, you know, any given government funding of that is only going to be a relatively small piece of that. You know, with a much smaller industry in Korea, government funding can be a huge impact. A second impact, one might call it. Yeah, well, I think China has a complicated relationship here. I think a lot of that comes back to the intensely communistic aspect of China, where I think there was just, you know, there was no official arm of animation in China, right? Like, nobody was tasked with doing that, so to speak. And it's not that China is that communist, but yeah, I think there hasn't been a company or set of companies that kind of specialize in that and that kind of got the official approval. Part of the problem too is that China has for a long time been sort of anti-Japanese culture, for understandable reasons, given the war they were in. So that whole thing has complicated things, where if you're making things in the anime style, it kind of looks like you're making something that's pro-Japan, and that's got to be complicated. So making animation that is Chinese is tough. Now, China has a long history of animation. There was a Chinese animated film made in '56, I think 1956, black and white, relatively crude, but it certainly existed. It was made, and there's a delicate sensibility to it at times. It's actually a Monkey King adaptation, Journey to the West adaptation, and so, you know, animation has been made in China. But part of the problem too is that, let's just be honest about this, China, you know, the Cultural Revolution kind of killed off a lot of the more fun industries in China for a long time. You know, people were trying to not starve for quite a while in China, after all that fun stuff. So just getting that going was really hard. Um, and so I think only now do you have enough, potential to actually go somewhere. Yeah, I've never been interested in that elitist, aspect of anime fandom or of any fandom. I don't think that there's much utility in following anyone else's views on what is good or bad, because it's always just ultimately very personal. Sorry, there we go. So it's early spring here where I live, which means that the bugs have started to awaken and come out, and so I have ants all over my kitchen right now, because they've awoken and they started, they're looking for places, so to speak. Basically, after the winter, things warm up and the migratory patterns kind of change, and where they go change. And so there've been a few places on my kitchen floor where I've apparently spilled something. Didn't seem like a big deal, but I now have ants, crawling all over this little bit of, I don't know, something sweet apparently that fell there. And yeah, so I now get little ants crawling up my my feet and legs, which is very distracting to feel that tickle there. Borax solution, I might do that. Thanks. There's an interesting conversation about gatekeeping, actually with the tabletop hobby recently among some fans. Now, in fairness, so I have complicated emotions about the whole idea of elitism and gatekeeping, because I think it can be useful to set standards of behavior, right? To say, as anime fans, for example, we expect people to be kind, to be open to other opinions, be willing to discuss things and so forth, and to have different viewpoints and to express those viewpoints. So and to me, that's kind of a form of gatekeeping, isn't it? Like, isn't that just what that is? And I think there's nothing wrong with that kind of gatekeeping. But yeah. Hello. There's also another little anime guy over there that's very hard to see. But and part of the problem there is I grew up in a time when geekdom very much self-identified as a place for smart people, frankly, for people who liked more intelligent stories, liked more thoughtful stories. If you were a geek, you were into things that were, different, but different for things that you like to think about and you like to talk about and you obsessed about because there was something there to obsess about, because there was some complexity, there was some depth there to dive into, which is an aspect of geekdom we very much lost. So I've never found it problematic for a fandom to say, we see certain, there are certain attributes of that fandom that we prize, as long as it's in a non-arbitrary way, right? Where it's not just, hey, you shouldn't do this because you're from this country. People from this country can't be part of this fandom. Like, that's dumb, or whatever. So yeah, hard to tell. Yeah, so I think Korea has options. I think Korea can go somewhere, but as with anything, I think, and this is another important thing to remember, is that yeah, exactly, just like there's and we've all been we've all had those elitist thoughts and those elitist attitudes at times. Yeah, I think there's a it's always hard to say this is going to happen in the future, because there are always pressures keeping things as they are. But things are also always changing, and they're usually changing in ways that people cannot predict. It's always something that comes out that everyone kind of derided at the time, or everyone kind of sneered at the time, that ends up becoming ubiquitous and a big thing. I have an Echo, an Amazon Alexa, over there. And that, I mean, I remember when that was announced and folks were like, who's going to do that? Like, that is ridiculous to have something constantly listening to you in your, in your house. Maybe a few geeks here and there will buy it, but that will never fly with the average person. And people have no problem with that. Now, obviously, it's not, it's not cheap enough that it's in every single home, but that was not a problem. People just snap that up. So I think change happens in ways that we usually cannot fully predict. So I think Korea has a lot of options and a lot of potential, but what that form will take, who knows? Which is one of the neat things, is that we can imagine these things, we can kind of plan for these things and think about these things, and say, yeah, we can't see the path forward here right now. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. That doesn't mean there isn't going to be some way for Korea to evolve and expand and become a big player in anime. You have to kind of, move around. Yeah, snark is another one of those things that I just... here's the thing. Snark should be a spice, right? Snark works best when it is an occasional bon mot. It's an occasional, thing said just that really enlivens a review or a thought or a video or an essay or whatever. But when everything is snark, it turns into cynicism. And that cynicism is just dark. It's just, it's basically, not trusting anything, not really liking anything. And it just gets so old after a while. There's just, who wants that in their lives all the time? And unfortunately, a lot of folks just don't know how to turn that off. And that is a trait that a lot of people have. They just can't figure out how to stop being snarky. And part of the problem there, too, is YouTube and social media in general, which rewards that. People share snark, and so people think that that's what you have to do all the time. And it's one of the big problems with a lot of social media sites right now is that everyone follows what is popular, and that tends to create a very specific set of behaviors, and which means that everyone sounds the same, which means that everyone is interchangeable, right? So everyone has, a YouTube thumbnail with a bunch of white text and a person's face on there with some strange reaction on it, and so then I start looking through YouTube things and everyone looks exactly like everyone else. And I'm like, well, I have no idea if you're any more snarky or any less snarky or any more interesting or deep because you look just like every other YouTuber. And then they all tend to sound the same because, again, they all hear that's, they all hear and see that these certain behaviors work, or that those certain behaviors get you more views. It's a classic thing where folks find what works and they follow that, but then that becomes the standard, and the only way to break out of the standard is to do something different, and so folks start doing the different thing, and then everyone starts doing the different thing, and that becomes the new standard. But with social media being what it is, and the difference here is that this is about money and livelihoods. People are literally quitting their jobs to do YouTube full time. And that is rough when you have to follow the standards and you have to be a meme, be a living meme, so as to pay your rent, right? So that's where it becomes a cultural difficulty, where folks kind of expect that to be to earn their livelihood, and when it's part of people's lives that much, right? So many people are on YouTube all the time and consume content on YouTube. It's the new television. So those become really important to communal standards and communal expectations. So it's a problem. It's why I kind of do things the way I do. I haven't changed a lot as a YouTuber, partly because I don't, I don't want to follow those trends. It just seems like a fool's errand, and it certainly has not gotten me a lot of views. That's the problem is my viewership on YouTube, and I'm not complaining, has steadily decreased because I'm not doing those things. And so I'm not following the crowd. And that's the price you pay. But I get to talk to awesome people like you, which that's the difference, is that I don't want the mass audience. I want you guys. I want you folks who say interesting things, and we all know what we're talking about. We all can discuss things. That's part of the joy. So on that note, I think I will move on tonight. I'm almost done actually with another one of those laptop bags. I'm having problems with my sewing machine, so I might play around with that a little bit more. I'm not quite sure, but yeah. So yeah, that's gonna do it for me for tonight. There'll be no anime club tomorrow and no RPG game. I've actually got some other stuff I'm doing. But we should be back to that pattern. Oh, I should mention, I am apparently having a lot of trouble with the drawing stream. I just have a difficult time working up my courage to draw, for lack of a better term. Not that drawing is hard, but that it's a lot of mental effort. And so I just get intimidated by doing it. And like I want to do it, I want to do more. But doing it Monday nights didn't seem to work. Doing it Wednesday nights doesn't seem to be working. I do it for a little while and then I stop. So I'm gonna figure out some other way of doing it. But I still want to keep on doing the Wednesday workshops and world building videos. So those will continue. But I'll try to find a better time for drawing. Anyway, thank you all very much. This was a great conversation as always, and see you guys next week. Bye.